It was even possible at the moment to switch one's hatred this way, or that by a voluntary act. Suddenly, by the sort of violent effect with which one wrenched one's head away from the pillow in a nightmare, Winston succeeded in the transferring his hatred,
Hatred.
transferring his hatred from the face on the screen to the dark-haired girl behind him. Vivid, beautiful hallucination.
Hallucinations.
Hallucinations, beautiful hallucinations, vivid, beautiful hallucinations flashed through his mind. He would flog her to death with the rubber truncheon, with a rubber truncheon. He would tie her naked to a stake and shoot her for hours, like Saint Sebastian. He would ravish.
Ravish.
He would ravish her and cut her throat at the moment of climax, better than before. Moreover, he realized why it was that he hated her. He hated her because she was young and pretty and sexualist, because he wanted to go to bed with her and would never do so, because round her sweet supper waist,
Supple waist.
which seemed to ask you to encircle it with your arm. There was only the obvious scarlet obvious,
Odious scarlet sash.
odious, scarlet sash, odious. There was only the odious scarlet sash, aggressive symbol of chastity, aggressive symbol of chastity. The heat rose to its climax. The voice of Golden Stem had become an actual ship's blade, and for an instant the face changed into that old shape. Then the ship face melted into the figure of a Eurasian soldier who seemed to be advancing, huge and terrible, as a submachine gun rolling and seeming to spring out of the surface of the screen, so that some of the people in the front row actually flinched backwards in their seats, but in the same moment, drawing a deep sigh of relief from everybody. The hostile The hostile figure melted into the face of Big Brother, black-haired, black-mustached,
Black mustachioed. Black mustachio.
black mustachio, black mustachioed, full of power and mysterious calm, and mysterious. Mysterious and full of power and mysterious calm, and so vast that it almost filled up the screen. Nobody heard that Big Brother was saying. It was merely a few words of encouragement, the sort of words that are uttered in the din of battle.
Uttered.
That are uttered in the din of battle, not distinguishable individually by not distinguishable individually, but restored confidence by the fact of being spoken. Then the face of Big Brother faded away again, and instead the three slogans of the party stood out in bold capitals: War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. Ignorance.
Ignorance.
Ignorance. Ignorance is strength.
Strength.
Strength. Ignorance is strength. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. But the face of Big Brother seemed to persist.
Persist.
But the face of Big Brother seemed to persist for several seconds on the screen, as though the impact that it had made on everyone's eyeballs was too vivid to wear off immediately. The little sand-haired woman had flung herself. The little sand-haired woman had flung herself. The little sand-haired woman had flung herself forward over the back of the chair in front of her. With the tremulous murmur that shook like my soul, he extended her arms toward the screen. Then he buried her face in her hand. It was apparent that she was uttering a prayer. At this moment, the entire group of people broke into a deep, slow, rhythmical chant of B, 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 over and over again, very slowly, with a long pause between the first B and the second, a heavy, murmurous sound, somehow curiously savage. Curiously savage. Savage. In the background of which one seemed to hear the stamp of naked feet and throbbing and the throbbing of tom-toms for perhaps as much as 30 seconds. For perhaps as much as 30 seconds, they kept it up. It was a refrain. It was a refrain that was often heard in moments of overwhelming emotion. It was a refrain. It was a refrain that was often heard in moments of overwhelming emotion. Partly it was a sort of hymn. Partly it was a sort of hymn to the wisdom and majesty, to the wisdom and majesty of Big Brother. But still more, it was an act of self-hypnosis. But still more, it was an act. Of self-hypnosis. Self-hypnosis. But still more, it was an act of self-hypnosis. Deliberate drawing of consciousness. Deliberate drawing of consciousness of being, of mean, or rhythmic noise. Rhythmic noise. Winston's inhale seemed to grow cold. In the 2 minutes heat, he could not help sharing in the general delirium. But this subhuman chanting of B, 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 B always filled him with horror. Of course, he chanted with zest. It was impossible to do otherwise. It was impossible to do otherwise. To dissemble your feeling, to control your face, to do what everyone else was doing, was an instinctive reaction. Was an instinctive reaction. Instinctive reaction.
Was an instinctive reaction.
Was an instinctive reaction, but there was the space of a couple of seconds during which the expression of his eyes might conceivably have betrayed him. And it was exactly at this moment that the significant thing at this moment that the significant and at this moment that the significant thing happened, if indeed it did happen. Momentarily he caught O'Brien's eye. O'Brien had stood up. He had taken off his spectacles and was in the act of resetting them on his nose with his characteristic gesture. But there was the fraction of a second when their eyes met, and for as long as it took to happen, Winston knew. Yes, he knew that O'Brien was thinking the same thing as himself. An unmistakable message had passed. It was as though their two minds had opened, and the thoughts were falling from one into the other through their eyes. "I'm with you," O'Brien seemed to be saying to him. "I know precisely I know precisely what you are feeling. I know all about your contempt, your hatred, your hatred,
Hatred.
your hatred, your disgust, your hatred, your disgust. But don't worry, I'm on your side." And then the flash of intelligence, was gone, and O'Brien's face was as incredible as everybody else.
Inscrutable.
Inscrutable was as inscrutable as everybody else, and O'Brien's face was as inscrutable as everybody else, and O'Brien's face was as inscrutable was as inscrutable as everybody else. That was all, and he was already uncertain whether it had happened. Such incidents never had any sequel. Never had any sequel. Such incidents never had any sequel. Never had any sequel. All that they did was to keep alive in him the belief, a hope that others beside himself were the enemies of the party. Perhaps the rumors of vast underground conspiracies were true after all. Perhaps the Brotherhood really existed. It was impossible, in spite of the endless arrests and confessions, endless arrests and endless arrests and confessions and executions. To be sure that the Brotherhood was not simple a myth. Someday he believed in it. Some days not. There was no evidence, only fleeting glimpse that might mean anything or nothing. Snatches.
snatches,
snatches or overhead conversation, faint scrabble on lavatory, faint scrabble or lavatory walls once. Flat,
faint scribbles on lavatory walls,
faint, which faint scrabble on lavatory walls once, even when two strangers met. Even when two strangers met, a small movement of the hand which had looked as though it might be a signal of recognition.
recognition,
It was all guesswork, very like he had imagined everything. Very likely he had imagined everything. He had gone back to his
cubicle,
He had gone back to his cubicle without looking at. He had gone back to his cubicle without looking at O'Brien again. He had gone back to his cubicle without looking at O'Brien again. The idea of following up their momentary contact hardly crossed his mind. It would have been inconceivably dangerous even if he had known how to set about doing it. For a second, 2 seconds, for a second, 2 seconds, he had exchanged an equal glance, and that was the end of the story. But even that was a memorable event. In the locked loneliness, in the locked loneliness in which one had to live, Winston roused himself and sat up straighter. He let out a bleach. He let out a belch.
He let out a belch.
He let out a belch. He let out a belch. The gin was rising from his stomach.
The gin was rising from his stomach.
The gin was rising from his stomach. The gin was rising from his stomach. His eye refocused on the page. He discovered that while he sat helplessly musing, he had also been writing, as though by automatic action, and it was no longer the same cramped, awkward handwriting as before. His pen had slid
voluptuously
over the smooth paper, printing in large neat capitals.
Printing in large neat capitals.
Done with Big Brother. His eyes refocused on the page. He discovered that while he sat helplessly musing, he had also been writing. While he sat helplessly musing, he had also been writing, as though by automatic action, and it was no longer the same craft of artwork handwriting as before. His pen had slid voluptuously. His pen had slid voluptuously over the smooth paper, printing in large net capital.
Need.
Need. Printing in large neat capitals. 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 Done with brother. Done with big 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 brother. Over and over again, filling half a page. He could not help feeling a twinge of panic. It was absurd, since his writing of those particular words was not more dangerous than the initial act of opening the diary. But for a moment he was tempted to tear out the spoiled pages and abandon the enterprise altogether.
Abandon.
He could not help feeling a twinge of panic. It was absurd, since the writing of those particular words was not more dangerous than the initial act of opening the diary. But for a moment he was tempted to tear out the spoiled pages and abandon the enterprise altogether. He did not do so, however, because he knew that it was useless, whether he wrote down with Big Brother or whether he refrained from writing it.
Refrained.
Or whether he refrained from writing it made no difference. Whether he went on with the diary or whether he did not go on with it made no difference. The thought policy would get him just the same. He had committed, would still have committed. Even if he had never set pen to paper the essential crime that contained all others in itself. Thought crime, they called it. Thought crime was one. Thought crime was not a sin that could be concealed forever. You might dodge successfully for a while, even for years, but sooner or later they were bound to get you.